June 1944. Northern France. While 156,000 Allied soldiers prepared to storm the beaches of Normandy in the largest amphibious invasion in human history, two British actors stood in a field surrounded by rubber tanks, wooden artillery pieces, and inflatable landing craft. Their mission seemed absurd: convince 40,000 battle-hardened German troops that an entire invasion force was preparing to strike 200 miles from the real landing zones. This wasn't theater. This wasn't a rehearsal. This was Operation Fortitude South, the most audacious military deception in history. And these two actors, along with 30 dummy paratroopers and a phantom army that existed only in German intelligence reports, would determine whether D-Day succeeded or failed before a single Allied boot touched French sand. What happened next didn't just fool the German army. It paralyzed Hitler's ability to respond to the real invasion, kept crucial panzer divisions frozen in place for 6 critical weeks, and ultimately saved tens of thousands of Allied lives. This is the untold story of when theatrical props and extraordinary courage held off an entire German army. By spring 1944, the fate of Europe hung on a knife's edge. Adolf Hitler's Atlantic Wall stretched from Norway to Spain. A massive network of bunkers, gun emplacements, and beach obstacles defended by 50 divisions totaling over 850,000 men. German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had fortified the French coast with millions of mines, thousands of steel obstacles, and artillery positions commanding every potential landing beach. The Allies faced an impossible problem. How do you surprise an enemy who knows you're coming? Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower understood that even with air superiority and naval dominance, the Germans could throw the invasion back into the sea if they positioned their forces correctly. Intelligence estimates were chilling. If German panzer reserves reached Normandy within 48 hours of the landings, Allied casualties could exceed 75%. The invasion could fail. The answer lay not in greater firepower, but in deception on a scale never before attempted. The plan was codenamed Operation Fortitude, and it would be executed by one of the war's most unusual military units, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, soon to be known as the Ghost Army. Formed in January 1944, this 1,100-man unit included artists, sound engineers, actors, and set designers recruited from art schools, advertising agencies, and Hollywood studios. Their commanding officer, Colonel Harry Reeder, had one directive from General Omar Bradley himself: make the Germans think we're everywhere we're not. But the most critical component of Fortitude South didn't involve Americans at all. It centered on two British actors whose names would remain classified for 40 years. Lieutenant Clifton James, a former stage performer, and Captain M.E. Clifton James, a professional actor and Army pay clerk who bore an uncanny resemblance to Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. The Germans were obsessed with Montgomery. Hitler's intelligence chief, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, had ordered every available resource devoted to tracking the British commander's location, believing, correctly, that wherever Montgomery appeared, the main Allied attack would follow. The Allies would use that obsession against them. In late March 1944, Lieutenant James received orders to report to a secure facility outside London. What happened in that room changed the course of the war. Intelligence officers laid out the plan. James would impersonate Montgomery on a highly publicized tour of British bases in southeastern England and the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, an entire Phantom Army, the fictitious 1st United States Army Group, or FUSAG, would be assembled in Kent and Sussex, directly across the English Channel from Pas-de-Calais. German reconnaissance aircraft would photograph vast concentrations of tanks, artillery, landing craft, and supply depots. German spies embedded in Britain would report frantic military activity. German signal intelligence would intercept radio traffic from dozens of divisions preparing for invasion. All of it would be fake. But the deception had to be perfect. German photo analysts could detect inconsistencies from 20,000 feet. A single mistake, a shadow falling the wrong direction, tire tracks that didn't match vehicle weight, supply movements that violated military doctrine could expose the entire operation. By early April, the deployment began. In fields across Kent, teams from the 23rd Special Troops erected inflatable Sherman tanks crafted from rubber and canvas. Each dummy weighed just 60 pounds, but appeared completely authentic from the air. Artillery pieces were constructed from wood and painted canvas stretched over scaffolding. Half-tracks and jeeps were created from plywood and chicken wire. The scale was staggering. Over 250 dummy tanks, 400 fake artillery pieces, and hundreds of inflatable landing craft-filled ports and staging areas. From the air, it looked like an invasion force of 150,000 men preparing to cross the Channel at its narrowest point, the Pas de Calais, exactly where German intelligence expected the attack. But props alone wouldn't convince the Germans. The Phantom Army needed to behave like a real one. Sound engineers from the 3,132nd Signal Service Company Special positioned themselves in fields near German observation posts across the Channel. At precisely coordinated times, they played recordings captured from actual armored divisions. The distinctive roar of 700-horsepower Sherman engines, the metallic clank of tank treads, the grinding rumble of supply convoys moving through the night. Speakers mounted on trucks broadcast these sounds at precisely calculated volumes to simulate entire columns of armor moving into position. Radio operators transmitted thousands of fake messages using the actual call signs and communication procedures of divisions that didn't exist. They reported supply requisitions, personnel transfers, equipment maintenance, all the mundane radio traffic that fills military networks. German signal intelligence stations intercepted it all, and their analysts built detailed order of battle assessments of Fusag's growing strength. Meanwhile, Clifton James underwent intensive training. He studied Montgomery's mannerisms, his distinctive gait, his habit of tapping his swagger stick against his leg. He practiced the field marshal's clipped speech patterns and memorized details about Montgomery's career that might come up in casual conversation. Makeup artists added Montgomery's distinctive facial features, but tailors recreated his uniform down to the last metal ribbon. On May 26, 1944, just 11 days before D-Day, James departed for Gibraltar in full view of German agents known to be operating in Britain. He toured British bases in North Africa, ostentatiously inspecting troops and holding meetings with commanders. German intelligence reported Montgomery's presence in the Mediterranean, filing urgent reports to Berlin. The Allied commander was positioning forces for operations in southern France or the Balkans, not northern France. Back in England, the deception intensified. General George S. Patton, whom the Germans considered America's finest tactical commander, assumed visible command of the fictitious Fusag. Patton was photographed visiting the dummy installations in Kent. He gave speeches to troops that consisted of special operations personnel and dummy vehicles. Every movement was carefully orchestrated to ensure German agents observed it and reported back to Berlin. By early June, German intelligence estimated Fusag's strength at 89 divisions, totaling nearly 1.5 million men, the largest concentration of Allied forces in Britain. In reality, fewer than 2,000 people were involved in creating this Phantom Army, supported by rubber, wood, canvas, and extraordinary audacity. But the most critical deception was still to come. June 5, 1944. 2,300 hours. As darkness fell across the English Channel, the real invasion fleet, 5,000 ships carrying 156,000 men, departed for the beaches of Normandy. In southeastern England, the Ghost Army prepared for the performance of their lives. At midnight on June 6th, as Allied paratroopers dropped into the Normandy countryside, a separate air operation unfolded 200 miles northeast. British bombers from 617 Squadron, the famous Damboosters, flew precise patterns over the Pas de Calais, dropping thousands of strips of aluminum foil called window. German radar screens lit up with what appeared to be a massive airborne armada heading straight for Calais. Simultaneously, Royal Navy vessels deployed Filbert, a system of radar-reflective balloons towed by small boats, creating the radar signature of an enormous invasion fleet crossing the Channel toward Calais at exactly the speed of a loaded convoy. At 1:30 hours, 30 dummy paratroopers, nicknamed Ruperts, dropped from RAF aircraft over the Calais region. These ingenious devices were 6-foot-tall burlap dummies rigged with explosive charges and sound effect recordings of gunfire and shouting. They were designed to detonate on impact, creating the impression of airborne troops engaging in firefights after landing. German defensive positions erupted. Searchlights swept the sky. Machine guns opened fire on the descending dummies. Artillery batteries launched illumination rounds. Within minutes, German commanders were reporting a major airborne assault in progress near Calais. At 200 hours, as American and British troops waded ashore at Utah, the Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches in Normandy, German 15th Army headquarters at Calais, received intelligence reports that sent shockwaves through the command structure. Enemy paratroopers landing in strength east of Calais. Heavy bombing of coastal defenses. Radar contacts indicating massive fleet approaching. Radio intercepts confirming FUSAG elements preparing to embark. General Hans von Salmuth, commanding the 15th Army's 19 divisions and 250,000 men, faced an impossible decision. Reports from Normandy indicated Allied landings there as well, but those beaches were defended by only 6 divisions of the 7th Army. Every instinct, every piece of intelligence, every analysis by Wehrmacht strategists had predicted the main attack would come at Calais. Yet von Salmuth had mobile reserves that could reach Normandy within 18 hours. But if he moved them and the real invasion struck Calais, he would be responsible for the greatest military disaster in German history. At 4:30 hours, as dawn broke over Normandy's blood-stained beaches, von Salmuth made his decision. He would hold position. The 15th Army would remain at Calais, defending against the invasion that German intelligence insisted was coming. In Normandy, Allied troops clung to narrow beachheads under murderous fire. At Omaha Beach, American forces suffered devastating casualties, pinned down by German defensive positions on the bluffs. British and Canadian troops pushed inland but met fierce resistance from the 21st Panzer Division. The entire invasion teetered on the edge of failure. Everything depended on whether German reserves could reach the battle before the Allies consolidated their positions. In his command bunker at Berchtesgaden, Adolf Hitler received contradictory reports. His intuition told him Normandy was a feint, that Eisenhower would launch the real invasion at Calais once German reserves committed to Normandy. He ordered the panzer divisions held in strategic reserve, refusing to release them until the situation clarified. The Ghost Army's deception was working. But for how long? For 6 crucial days, the Phantom Army at Calais maintained its performance. Teams worked around the clock, moving dummy equipment, broadcasting radio traffic, and creating the appearance of final preparations for invasion. German reconnaissance flights photographed FUSAG forces seemingly poised to strike across the Channel. Clifton James having completed his Mediterranean tour, returned to Britain and was photographed inspecting units in Kent. German intelligence concluded that Montgomery had returned to take personal command of the Calais assault. The 23rd Special Troops introduced new elements to sustain the deception. They hired local civilians to spread rumors in pubs and shops about Allied preparations. They arranged for German agents to accidentally intercept false documents detailing invasion plans for Calais. They even staged false security breaches, allowing the Germans to capture misleading intelligence that appeared too authentic to be planted. German 15th Army remained frozen at Calais. The 19 divisions that could have annihilated the Normandy beachhead stayed in their defensive positions, waiting for an invasion that would never come. By June 12th, Allied forces in Normandy had linked all 5 beachheads into a continuous front 60 miles wide and up to 15 miles deep. Over 326,000 troops, 54,000 vehicles, and 104,000 tons of supplies had come ashore. The foothold was secure, but the deception continued. German intelligence still believed Fusag represented the main invasion force. Hitler personally insisted that Calais remained the primary threat. On June 17th, 11 days after D-Day, the Führer still refused to release the 15th Army to reinforce Normandy, despite increasingly desperate pleas from field commanders watching the Allies break out of their beachhead. The genius of Operation Fortitude wasn't just that it fooled the Germans before D-Day. It paralyzed German decision-making for 6 weeks after the invasion, during the most critical period when mobile reserves could have pushed the Allies back into the sea. Not until late July, after the American breakout at Saint-Lô and the encirclement of German forces in the Falaise pocket, did Hitler finally accept that Normandy was the actual invasion. By then, it was far too late. The Ghost Army's tactical deceptions continued throughout the European campaign. Between June 1944 and March 1945, and the 23rd Special Troops conducted 21 battlefield deceptions, simulating entire divisions to confuse German intelligence. They saved an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 Allied lives by drawing enemy forces away from real operations. But Operation Fortitude South remained their masterpiece, the deception that changed the course of the war. The human cost of D-Day was staggering. Allied casualties on June 6th exceeded 10,000 men, with 4,414 confirmed dead. But military historians universally agree. Without Operation Fortitude, casualties would have been catastrophically higher. If the German 15th Army had counterattacked Normandy in the first week, the invasion could have failed entirely, potentially extending the war by years and adding hundreds of thousands to the death toll. The full story of Operation Fortitude remained classified until 1976, 32 years after D-Day. When the files were finally declassified, military historians realized they had been studying the Normandy invasion without understanding one of its most critical elements. The men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops returned home in 1945 with strict orders never to discuss their service. Many took their stories to the grave. Families discovered only decades later that their fathers and grandfathers had been part of the Ghost Army. Clifton James published his memoirs, I Was Monty's Double, in 1954, though key details remained censored. The book was adapted into a film in 1958, but the full extent of the deception operations wasn't revealed until long after James's death in 1963. In 2013, the United States Congress awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to the 23rd Special Troops, finally recognizing their extraordinary contribution to victory. Fewer than a dozen veterans attended the ceremony. Silent heroes who had changed history with inflatable tanks and theatrical courage. German records captured after the war revealed the deception's devastating effectiveness. Interrogations of senior Wehrmacht officers showed that Hitler and his general staff genuinely believed throughout June and July 1944 that Normandy was a diversion. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Supreme Commander West, testified that the 15th Army's paralysis at Calais was the decisive factor in Germany's failure to defeat the invasion. Intelligence assessments found that German forces at Calais outnumbered the actual Allied invasion force, yet they never fired a shot at the real battle. A phantom army of rubber and wood had defeated 40,000 combat troops armed with tanks, artillery, and absolute certainty they were protecting the invasion's true objective. The legacy of Operation Fortitude extended far beyond World War II. Modern military deception doctrine, from Desert Storm's phantom amphibious assaults to contemporary information warfare, traces its roots to the principles proven in those English fields in 1944. The Ghost Army demonstrated that in warfare, the enemy's perceptions can matter more than physical reality, that creative thinking can overcome material superiority, and that courage comes in many forms. Today, the handful of surviving dummy equipment pieces reside in museums, silent witnesses to one of history's most improbable victories. Visitors marvel at the simple rubber and wood constructions that fooled an entire army. But the real story isn't about the props. It's about the soldiers, actors, artists, and engineers who understood that winning the war required not just fighting Germans, but outwitting them. 2 actors and 30 dummies held off 40,000 German soldiers, not with weapons, but with imagination, precision, and unwavering commitment to a mission that seemed impossible. They proved that in the chaos of war, sometimes the greatest weapon is the one the enemy never sees coming. 30 minutes to 31 minutes. Outrow Operation Fortitude South saved D-Day before the first shot was fired. The men who executed it fought a different kind of battle, one waged with deception, creativity, and extraordinary courage under circumstances that offered no room for error. Seers, they never fired a weapon, yet they saved tens of thousands of lives and altered the course of human history. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.